Hey everyone, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust, and I'm sort of containing my excitement for being back here again. It's been a few years, and a few years is too long before you stand here at Trophy Point at West Point, scene or site of the U.S. Military Academy. If you've never been here, make plans to come here. When you walk around here, you see the history all around you, the American military history. All of the American military history stories you've heard are connected to this place in one way or another. There's statuary, there are trophies that have been coming here ever since the American Revolution. We've got fortifications, we've got an unparalleled military cemetery here, and you have this sort of center of learning for the United States military or the Army. And this is just an unbelievable place to come. And before we go on and bring on our first guest, I really want to, encourage y'all to share this with your friends. You never know which friends of yours are sort of interested in American history, let alone, now I'm getting a little more worked up, let alone American military history, let alone some of the wars and battles and places associated with West Point. So share this, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook and all your other favorite social media channels, and I think that you and your network will be a little bit better for it. We got Kris White behind the camera, but let me now bring on Aaron Rowland. He's at the West Point Museum. There are unparalleled collections here and in the special collections as well as the museum. And Aaron's a museum technician here, and you of course live here. Tell us a little bit about this place.
I do. I'm actually very excited to be joining you guys here today. Glad you guys are here. I think I'm more excited than Garry is to be here. Speaking of our history here, we have a little bit of everything for everyone. The most important thing to remember that you should take away from West Point is the fact that we have a saying here. It's much of the history we teach was created by those we taught. And everything that you see surrounding us has a history. The amazing Hudson Highlands, the Hudson River, the Fortress West Point, Storm King Mountain, the artillery fortifications, the U.S. Military Academy. We have something for everyone. It doesn't matter what you're interested in. We have something for you, for everyone, and we really would like to encourage you guys to come down here and visit us. As you can see, we're standing here at Trophy Point, one of the most iconic, beautiful places of West Point. Behind us is the plain where all of the cadets do their marching and their graduation ceremonies, their parades, and of course the barracks. And then all of that is just in part of this one great 250-year-old plus almost at this point in time story that is West Point, the United States Military Academy. So we do hope that you guys will not only come back to visit us, but if you haven't been here to visit us before, please come and visit us here soon. So we'll share with Garry our information about our hours, etc., and so forth. So we hope you'll come down and also give us a follow on Facebook at the West Point Museum. Garry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Excellent, Aaron. Thank you. Let me just say that when you do come to visit, just know that you're walking in the footsteps of U.S. Grant and George Meade and Robert E. Lee and John Sedgwick and so many of all these other people that we talk about.
And Garry Adelman.
And now that, please don't put me in that group. Let me get me off camera here to avoid the embarrassment here and bring on Kris White. This dude is a wealth of knowledge. He is our Deputy Director of Education here at the American Battlefield Trust. And get ready, this dude went to school around here. He knows some stuff. Take it away, Mr. Kris White.
Excuse me, thanks, Garry. So I am not a West Point graduate, neither is Aaron. We are both Norwich graduates, and we wouldn't have Norwich University, which is about 5 hours off in that direction, up the Hudson River Valley, up Lake Champlain, near Montpelier, Vermont. We wouldn't have our alma mater if it wasn't for West Point, because Alden Partridge, who was the superintendent here at West Point, was ousted, and he decides to go and create his own military academy in 1819. But West Point itself is just a fantastic place to come to. This is an area, as both Garry and Aaron have pointed out, that has shaped American leaders. Now, when it was founded in 1802 by President Thomas Jefferson, it was looked at as being an engineering school and a school of science. Now, becoming an officer was part of that, but it's not the way we think of it today, where we're molding full leaders. What they were looking at was leadership on the scientific front, which will be the civilian front later on, when they're going to go out and work on things like railroads, canals, lighthouses, improving the infrastructure of the United States, and a lot of that comes from right here at West Point. But before we get to all of that, we have, you know, to talk about presidents, we have soldiers, statesmen. In fact, we have astronauts. The first man to walk in space, Ed White, was a West Point graduate of the class of 1852, I believe, and or 1952. And then we have Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, who graduated the year, I think, before Ed White. I might have them flipped around. But we have others who are up here. We have President Eisenhower, President Grant. We have so many important people who have come from West Point. But West Point, and standing at Trophy Point, let's point out why West Point is important. We're on a West Point above the Hudson River. The Hudson River is behind me, and the Hudson River is very important to this part of New York State. New York City is about 50 miles to the south of us. You would come up the Hudson River, come through the S-bend here at West Point, and then head north. You could take a portage over to Lake George. From Lake George, you would go north to Lake Champlain. From Lake Champlain, you could take the Richelieu River up to the St. Lawrence, and that would take you into Canada. Why is all of this important? Well, that is the invasion of advance for the Canadian Army. If they would come down here at one point, at that time it would be the French Army, then the British Army, talking about the French and Indian War, then the American Revolution. And if the Americans are going to push up into that area, you could follow that same route, like Benedict Arnold and Richard Montgomery do in the American Revolution, and then when we try again in the War of 1812. So this whole area is very important, and it's the waterways of this region that makes this an important transportation feature. Because remember, we're in the backwoods here in the 16 and 1700s in New York, leading up towards Vermont and other places like that. So we need these waterways to move up and down from New York City all the way up to basically between Montreal and Quebec. Now, why West Point becomes important will be really during the American Revolution. And let's start to take a little bit of a walk here along Trophy Point. During the American Revolution, around 1775, we're going to start to see the Continental Congress forming an army, the Continental Army as we know it. And by 1778, we need to start fortifying this position around here at West Point. But there were other things happening up in this area. By 1776, New York City has fallen to the British. Whenever New York City falls to the British, that means that the largest city in this region, and leading you up into the Hudson River Valley, as I pointed out, up towards Canada, makes it very difficult for the American Army, the Patriot Army, to try and hold back the British incursions. So by 1777, the British come up with a plan. In fact, they come up with 3 different plans. They keep sending these words back to Great Britain. They're like, we're going to try this. No, 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 we changed our mind. We're going to try this. No, 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 we're going to try something else. But in 1777, a guy named John Burgoyne, a general for the British Army, is going to move down from Canada. He is going to send men down towards Fort Ticonderoga, which will be captured in July of 1777. He'll send another force under Barry St. Leger down towards a place called Fort Stanwix, and we will have battles there. Fort Stanwix is an awesome National Park Service site, by the way. And that will be the Saratoga campaign, which will culminate in a September and October 1777 battle, which will force the capitulation of a British army under Burgoyne. This is going to legitimize the Americans in the eyes of the French. The French always hate the British at this point in time, and this is going to help to bring in the French to help us officially in the American Revolution, even though they've been here helping out behind the scenes. So West Point down in this area needs to be fortified because a force under Sir Henry Clinton had moved up into this area in 1777, taken a little place called Stony Point. There'll be another battle there later on where Mad Anthony Wayne wins a victory. But West Point has to be defended because there's this S-bend on the river. This is going to block Burgoyne and Clinton from coming together, while a whole other army goes to the south, down up through the Delaware, up through Chesapeake Bay, up through the Head of Elk in Delaware today, or Maryland, and then up towards the colonial capital of Philadelphia. So we have all kinds of campaigns taking place, but West Point would be the key to blocking Clinton and Burgoyne coming together. Well, over time, Burgoyne's army surrenders, Clinton's army falls back to New York City, and then we have Philadelphia falling to the Americans. Into this area, we will start to send American soldiers overseen by basically French and Polish engineers. Their job is to come here, and if you're wondering what's going on behind us, there's an entire company getting ready to mount up. So we are on an active military post. So we're just gonna stay off to the side for a moment. And so as we're building this post up here, we're gonna place fortifications, which we're gonna visit here. We have Fort Clinton, that is not named after Sir Henry Clinton. It's named after James Clinton, who's eventually a brigadier general in the Continental Army. We have Fort Putnam, named after Rufus Putnam, who is the brother of Israel Putnam, if you've heard of him. And we have some other fortifications. Fort Clinton was once known as Fort Arnold, after a man named Benedict Arnold, who we'll talk about in another video, who gave up or tried to give up West Point to the British in 1780. So this whole area becomes important, but how do we stop the British Navy from coming up into this area? We're gonna try to walk over here, give you a view of an active military post for a moment. We're gonna try to block the Hudson River by placing what is called the Great Chain across it. So one way of blocking rivers back into medieval times and all the way up into today, you'll place obstructions in it. Sometimes there'll be logs, sometimes there'll be mines as we know them, or torpedoes during the Civil War. Other times it will be using chains. You ever played the game Assassin's Creed, the one that is Valhalla? You actually have to break up some chains going across some of the rivers in London or around London. This is what one of those chains would kind of look like. This great chain would have come from here, just below us on the West Point, over to Constitution Island. Constitution Island's an important feature up here. And this chain, which would have been made of links, which are about 2 feet long, they weigh about 114 pounds apiece. And when this chain goes all the way across the river, it will weigh 65 tons and can be placed together using different systems, anchored down along the riverfront. And then you add batteries placed along the riverfront, one called the chain battery, to protect the chain. And they would have interlocking fields of fire, so if a boat came up here, you could fire at the boat, and the chain, in theory, would stop it. Now, we put in a chain for a few reasons. Number one, it's mobility issues. We made this thing in Orange County, New York, and we also made part of it in New Jersey. Bringing it here, that's one way you have to do it. Another reason is because the Hudson's a tidal river. It would go up and down 3 to 5 feet. So you had to have give and take with this great chain. Today there are 13 links up here, as they would call it at one point, and that would be for the 13 colonies who fought here during the American Revolution. But we call this Trophy Point specifically because we have trophies of war here. One of such trophy is this 8-inch howitzer that was captured at Saratoga from the British Army. You can actually see what is believed to be battle damage on the muzzle of the gun here, where it almost looks like a round ball hit this thing. A howitzer is a gun that will fire in an arcing trajectory over top of fortifications, over top of men, and into fortifications or into lines of men. We have dolphins on the top. These dolphins here, mostly decorative, look like dolphins or weird dolphins and things. But this is one of the many trophies that was brought here to Trophy Point.
Thanks, Chris. Give him a break. You can grab a throat lozenge real quick. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are at West Point. We're at Trophy Point, and there are active operations going on around us, so excuse us for that. I just thought I would jump in while Chris is talking about the first of many cannon tubes and cannons we're going to be discussing here, is that they actually make cannons here at West Point. The West Point Foundry is just a little ways off in that distance, and I care about the West Point Foundry because one of the most common guns you will see on Civil War battlefields are called Parrott rifles. You see, they originally made these things out of cast iron. They weren't very powerful, and they were exploding at the breech, at the back of the cannon. So Parrott came up with a way to wrap the cast iron in a wrought iron jacket. That's why Parrotts are distinctive. There's a jacket around the back, and every one of those, unless there's some of the Confederate knockoffs you see that they made during the war, say WPF right on the side of it, or the trunnion there, and it says RPP. WPF is West Point Foundry. RPP is actually Robert P. Parrott. Lastly, eventually Parrott's thing works so well that he is actually going to inspire someone else to say, well, if this wrought iron's working so well to make the gun stronger, why don't we make the whole gun out of wrought iron? That's the 3-inch ordnance rifle. That'll be the modern gun of the Civil War. It looks like Aaron's looking to come on here, so come on, Aaron.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I should mention that not only was the West Point Foundry located nearby, it was the town of Cold Spring was the hometown birthplace of our wonderful Governor Kay Warren, who we're going to talk about during the Gettysburg Battle anniversary, and some other notable people throughout history. But I just wanted to, real quick, I wanted to let you guys know that on top of everything else that there is to do here at West Point, you can still walk the original grounds of the West Point boundary. There's still structures there, there's nature trails, there's history and all that, everything there for you. And you can even walk the original plank, the area where they would test fire those Parrott guns that were going to be used and eventually sent down to places like First Manassas or First Bull Run, Gettysburg, Petersburg, and so on and so forth. So these guns were tested just right up the river here from you, and you can walk those same grounds. So I should mention that the West Point Battery that was raised here in the winter of 1861, leading into the Civil War, some of the very first Parrott guns that were used in the war were used at First Manassas by the West Point Battery. So I just wanted to make sure that we gave that special plug. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
All right, so let's take a walk and talk here. As we go along, again, we have a convoy that's forming up behind us. It would not be an American Battlefield Trust video if we didn't have lawnmowers, military vehicles, airplanes. It's always, we find these things here. But as we walk down to some of our next trophies, you know, after the Revolutionary War, West Point will never fall to the British. Again, we'll talk about on another video Benedict Arnold and his treachery against the Continental Army and George Washington. What ends up happening here is West Point will then be turned into a school of learning. Now, Jefferson picks up the mantle from George Washington, our first president. What Washington wanted to do was install a military school. We're starting to see them pop up in places like Germany, France, Great Britain in the 1600s and 1700s, so he wants to pick up on that tradition. Well, Congress, and especially in the early days of the Republic here, they don't trust a strong military. Remember what happened with the British military. They had the Quartering Act and different things to fight these British officers in our Bill of Rights and in the Declaration of Independence. They talk about the strong standing army here who kind of looked over top of them. They don't want to have this strong standing army. So Washington can't get the school funded. Adams has other problems, the second president, John Adams. But Thomas Jefferson in 1802 had the epiphany to bring together a school of learning. One of the reasons he's going to do this is because the army that he has under him, and believe me, I could get into a lot of different things about the Army and Navy. Sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller. We couldn't decide how large of a military we needed to have. Well, ironically, Jefferson, who wanted to have a small army, wanted to put in this military school. As I mentioned earlier, he wants to put it in for science and learning. This will be the first engineering school in the United States, so that's one of the reasons he wants to have this. All of the engineers who come here to West Point to help us create these fortifications during the Revolutionary War were from France or other places. We might have had some, you know, basically backwoods engineers in America, but they weren't trained in an academy setting. So Jefferson also wants to push Federalist officers out of the Army. So when he first forms this school in 1802, he starts putting Republicans in, and it's not the Republican parties and Federalists we think of today, but he wants to push Republicans to be into this military academy so that he can shrink the size of the Army, push some of those Federalists out, bring some Republicans in, and he kind of politicizes the Army for a short time. Fast forward to the time of Sylvanus Thayer, who is the father of the military academy, as they call him, when he comes in to take over as superintendent here at West Point. He decides to do away with that, try to make it a little bit more of a meritocracy, because before that you have the president or congressman or others push people into the academy. He wanted to make it more of a meritocracy, have an entrance exam, and then have the curriculum weed out who could or could not make it here at West Point. So that's how we start to see the evolution here. And there we'll start to form up, and as we go over to the Battle Monument, we'll talk about some of the things that they're going to teach here. But he is going to start to form the West Point Military Academy as we know it today. Over here we have a couple of the trophies from the Spanish-American War. This gun over here, I think it's a 14-centimeter gun as they call it, was from Cuba whenever they captured Cuba in the Mexican-American War in 1898. So these were brought over. We have mortars, we have other things. We're going to head over towards some of our Civil War guns here as we head this way. Aaron, Garry, anything to add as we're walking along? Gary's grabbing the mic right now.
Just amazed. I'm also going to take one of the rare moments to say that we captured Cuba in the Spanish-American War.
Oh, sorry.
You know, Kris gets to do this to me all the time, so I thought I'd add that real quick. He still might cut this out in post, so I'm not so sure he's going to edit this video.
I'll leave it in.
Here we are at more cannon, so we have filled the space, Kris.
This is what happens whenever you're working without a net and without a script. So we move into the Civil War era of the trophy point, and there's Civil War cannon here. There's Civil War cannon over there. There's more Civil War cannon beyond. There's the battle monument, which is to the regular army during the American Civil War. It was dedicated in June of 1864. Technically, the plot of land was by George McClellan, who was on the presidential campaign trail at that point. He comes up here, gives a grand speech. But in 1897, the monument itself will be dedicated. And we'll look at that in a moment. But you can see here, we have guns captured from Charleston, Mobile, other parts of the Confederacy brought here to Trophy Point. And when I say captured, in many cases these guns are recaptured because they were actually owned at one point by the United States Army, taken by the Confederacy, retaken by the United States Army. So let's take a walk over this way, Garry. This might be the easiest way. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. Please click that subscribe button, share this with your friends, with your family, and as we head over to the Battle Monument, what I want to do is walk up to it and just point out some names to you. These may be familiar as you come up into this point. We'll also go over to the Mexican-American War, which took place in 1846-48 that I swapped around. But you might see over here a monument, and I'll put in some B-roll, to John Sedgwick. John Sedgwick, the Union 6th Corps commander, was killed at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And there's a monument to him. He's a West Point graduate of the class of 1837, hailed from Cornwall Hollow, Connecticut, and much of his collection of saddles, his hats, and liquor cabinet are actually owned here by the West Point Museum. The only thing I take issue with the monument of John Sedgwick is they have his pants tucked into his boots, and that's not how he wore them. He wore his pants over his boots, but always had spurs, and you can walk up and spin one of his spurs. As we walk up here, just want to point out some of the names on this monument. This is to the United States Army, the regulars as we would call them during the American Civil War. On the main monument obelisk and shaft here at the top, we have a Fame. That will be a sculpture of Fame, the Greek goddess. That's the second iteration of Fame that's up there. The first one was so large and so garish that they actually had it taken down and they put a smaller one up there. Then we put the names of West Point graduates here who served in the American Civil War. On the outer spheres, we'll have United States enlisted men who served in the regular Army. But as you walk around, you might see a lot of names that you recognize. Over here, we have John Fulton Reynolds. You see he's a colonel here, but John Reynolds is a major general, isn't he? Well, that gets into some confusions of who's a volunteer, what's your rank in the regular Army, different things like that. Emil Whipple, who was killed at the Battle of Chancellorsville, is there. Down over here, we have some interesting folks that you'll start to see. Like my favorite one over here is Alonzo Cushing, recent Medal of Honor recipient for his actions during the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. Below him is William Terrell. Terrell was the West Point graduate of Phil Sheridan, and he's the reason that little Phil Sheridan actually graduated from West Point at one point. But Terrell and Sheridan get into a fight, and when Sheridan is expelled for 1 year from West Point, it was Terrell that he attacked with a bayonet, and he got kicked out, and he had to graduate 1 year later. Aaron?
Real quick, so going back to Colonel turned General Reynolds, Reynolds actually served as the commandant of the Corps of Cadets here at West Point in 1860 and 1861 before leaving the academy to join the armies in the field during the oncoming late unpleasantness, if you will, right at the start of the war. So I just wanted to throw that in real quick, and I'll turn it right back over to you guys.
All right, we have up here Jesse Reno, or Renault is how his name's technically pronounced according to the family. He was killed at the Battle of South Mountain in September of 1864. As you keep moving around here, you might see Joseph Mansfield, 12th Corps commander, killed at Antietam. James Birdsey McPherson, who was the Army of the Tennessee commander in the Western Theater. But you can walk all around this and just see a veritable who's who of leadership on this monument as you make your way around the battle monument here at West Point. And I should point out, these are men who were all killed in action as we look. Like John Sedgwick's here, George Baird killed at Fredericksburg. It is just a who's who of West Point, and it shows that these soldiers who stuck with the United States Army, this was the monument to them that was placed here at West Point. I see Garry miking up.
Yeah, that must mean you can see we have 2 mics and we got 3 people. So here we are. I love coming to this particular monument, not only to pay tribute to some of those killed from the regular Army in so many of these battles, but Aaron, this is your big test, your first time behind the camera. Follow me down the steps here. First of all, Aaron tells me, I'm not going to claim credit for this. Yes, it's tough with that bottom of that monopod there. Maybe hand it back to Kris there as we're going to do the more difficult stuff here. You know, Aaron tells me that the ringing cannons buried into the ground. Now, you go to battlefields, you see different things. An upright cannon barrel might mean a headquarters. It might mean where somebody was killed or mortally wounded. A downward pointing one might be where someone's killed or mortally wounded, or a headquarters. Well, here, these are captured Confederate cannons, maybe appropriately symbolically pointing downward, whereas this monument itself, if you'll turn around here, has 18th century cannons, sort of cannon barrels, replicas, with famous Civil War barrels actually on them. You've got Bull Run right here. And right near the front of the monument, you've got Bull Run, you've got a little misspelled Chickamauga, and then you've got Gettysburg and Vicksburg flanking the front as well, going around Franklin, Nashville, Shiloh, Stones River, all of these on this. You could stare around this monument and the cannons here at Trophy Point for literally hours. I just sort of went into a zone of zen for a while at the Mexican War captured cannons. Aaron, what you got?
So real quick, I just wanted to clarify a little bit. So all the cannon that you do see out here, they are captured Confederate cannon, but the cannon that are on the monument, battle monument itself, those are reproductions. They are done for the monument itself. So when it was built, these were cast specifically for the monument when it was built. So I just wanted to make sure that our good folks at home knew that. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah, and over here we have some of these spheres that you see. These will be the names of the enlisted men. Those will be your sergeants, corporals, privates who served in the U.S. Army, who were killed during the war, who served in the Eastern Theater, Western Theater, and other parts of the war. But this is one of the most imposing monuments here at West Point. And as we start to wrap up, you know, let me swing Garry around so that you can see the plain. This is the parade field today. And the plain will lead out. The Cadet Chapel was created in 1910, is kind of up on the hill. As Aaron pointed out, you'll have out here the different halls. The superintendent's house is just through those trees over there. I could put some B-roll in for you. Commandant's house is over there. He pointed out this morning the dean's house is also in that line. As we come across here, we see these artillery pieces and these cannons from the Civil War. Now these soldiers, remember, who served in the Civil War specifically, they're going to learn basically from the same people. Some of these men who served in the North and South were instructors here at West Point. But one of the most famous instructors was a guy named Dennis Hart Mahan. He is going to teach a lot of these young men on both sides of the war about the military theory, about fortifications and other things, and he's going to run a club here. He was actually asked by the cadets to run what's called the Napoleon Club, which was one of the more advanced clubs here at West Point, and they would write papers. They had to be at least 30 pages long, between 30 and 60 pages long, and about the campaigns of Napoleon, because they were fascinated by him and to learn more about it. One of Henry Halleck's papers focused just on the logistics of Napoleon, and you could read about that if you go to the Library of Congress. And Mahan will teach these men how to fight. But the ironic thing, or teach them about military theory, teach them about engineering. The ironic thing is he went over to France, basically lifted at the time a guy named Antoine-Henri Jomini's treatise on war. He'll also take this treaty written by a guy named Sebastian Vauban. He'll bring it over here. He won't make too many changes to it. But that same book that he will write here and that will be issued to the cadets to learn about fortifications and things was then lifted by the Confederates and reprinted in places like Charleston and Richmond in 1862 and 63. So they're literally using the same manuals at times on both sides of the war that they had used here at West Point. Now they're taking them in the field, and they're one of the reasons we have such bloodshed on these Civil War battlefields is they're literally reading from the same playbook. It's amazing. So there's a lot more we're going to explore here. We're going to check out Benedict Arnold and his treachery in another video. We're going to go to the West Point Museum, and we're also going to head over to the West Point Cemetery. And remember, as Garry pointed out at the beginning, this is a place where you know, people like Omar Bradley, George Patton, the Dwight David Eisenhower, the World War II fame came out of here. The West Point class of 1915 alone produced almost 60 generals. 36% of its officers who were produced here at West Point became a general officer. 2 of them 5-star generals and 1 a president. Think about that. That's just one class here at West Point. In 1846, we have the famous Civil War class of men like George McClellan and Thomas Stonewall Jackson going off to war. We had Ulysses S. Grant, Sherman, Sheridan, so many others. And again, as I pointed out earlier, you had Ed White, who was killed in the Apollo 1 project. You had Buzz Aldrin, who walked across the moon. We have so many people here. We have female cadets, finally, whenever it's integrated to be a female and male academy later on. George Davis is one of the 4th African Americans to graduate here from West Point. He's a Tuskegee Airman and goes on to become, I believe, a 4-star general. So this is going to shape the future leaders of the United States as well as other countries, because we have international graduates here at West Point as well. So this is a place that I encourage everybody to come out to, check it out, and just walk around here, and you'll be taken in not only by the history, but just by the breathtaking beauty of the Hudson Highlands. Aaron?
So to add a little bit additional history for you on the, well, the history of West Point here, Kris was talking about the founding of the military academy. Well, today we've got hidden in some plain sight is the some history of the academy and some of the oldest buildings on post. So the one building that you can see on post just immediately behind me here is the superintendent's quarters, and to its right, you can't see it, maybe through the trees a little bit, is the commandant's quarters, and just off through the trees a little way is the dean's quarters. So let me give you a little rundown on how that works. I'll be like 5 seconds. The superintendent of the military academy is a 3-star general. The commandant is a 1, and the dean is also a 1. So you've got a lieutenant general overseeing 2 brigadier generals, and they all live right here. So that's a lot of stars right there. A lot of general officers for you guys. So Garry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Dude, that is super well done. Usually when people say 2 seconds or 10 seconds, they usually mean 7 minutes. My compliments. Also, my compliments to you for watching this video, for sharing this video. Make sure I hope you've already seen some of the great videos we've posted associated with Gettysburg 160, along with the West Point Museum, who have graciously invited us here, who have graciously met us down at Gettysburg. We hope you check some of that out. We hope you'll follow them as well. And this would have not been a complete video without Kris White working in Jomini and Mahan. So well done, Kris White. Everybody, we really appreciate your patience. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate your support of battlefield preservation, and especially of helping to spread the word about battlefield and American history education to the public and all the people you know.